Chapter 2 of the Iliad. This is on page 131 of your textbook. Achilles' mother agrees to persuade Zeus to restore Achilles' honor by showing the Greeks that, unless he rejoins the war, the Trojans will defeat them. Zeus sends Agamemnon a false dream that tells the king to attack Troy now, for the attack will be successful. When the Greeks and the Trojans meet on the battlefield, Menelaus and Paris fight one another, but neither warrior is clearly victorious. Then godlike Achilles sat down alone beside the shore of the loud-sounding sea and cried. Stretching out his hands, he prayed to his mother, silver-footed Thetis. "Seeing that my life will be so brief," he began, "surely Zeus, the loud thunderer, should permit me to be honored. Yet wide-ruling Agamemnon has dishonored me by seizing Briseis, my prize of honor." Thetis heard Achilles' prayer deep in the salty sea. Quickly she emerged like a mist, comforting her son as she listened to his tale of sorrow. When he had finished, Achilles said, "As I was growing up in my father's house, I often heard you brag about how, of all the immortal gods, you alone saved Zeus of the storm clouds when the other gods united against him and bound him up so intricately. You brought Briareus, one of the 100-handed giants, to rescue him, and in this way you earned his eternal affection and gratitude. So please help me now," Achilles pleaded. "Go to Zeus, Lord of Counsel, and ask him to help the Trojans for my sake, letting the Greeks die by their ships. Only through disaster will Agamemnon, that arrogant son of Atreus, discover how blind he was when he refused to honor the best of the Greeks." Tearfully, Thetis replied, "Knowing how short your life will be, I wish that you could have been spared this grief. Instead, you bear sorrows that are too great for any one man. Do not attempt to leash your anger. Avoid all battle, and stay instead by your swift black ships. Meanwhile, I will go up to snow-covered Olympus and plan to convince Zeus to support us." Achilles obeyed his mother's instructions. He no longer attended the council sessions where men win glory, and he remained idly by his ships, far from the battlefield. Yet he sorely missed the war cry and the fighting. As she had promised, Thetis approached Zeus as he sat alone upon the highest peak of many-ridged Olympus. "Father Zeus," she prayed, "if ever I have helped you by word or deed, hear my plea. Bring honor to my son, who is fated to die so young, for Agamemnon has dishonored him by taking his prize of honor. Please help the Trojans until the Greeks restore my son's honor and compensate him for their insult. Bow your head in agreement, or else deny my prayer and show me how little you honor me." Zeus, the cloud-gatherer, replied, "You are making my life with Hera more difficult by asking this of me. She already complains that I have given the Trojans too much help in battle. Yet I will do as you wish." While gods and mortals slept, Zeus considered how he could best bring honor to Achilles and kill many of the Greeks beside their black ships. He decided to send wide-ruling Agamemnon a misleading dream. Calling Dream to his side, he commanded, "Go, harmful Dream, and tell Agamemnon to rouse the long-haired Greeks to battle, since now they can conquer the well-defended city of the Trojans. Hera has convinced all the gods to side with the Greeks." So Zeus spoke, and Dream went to Agamemnon, appearing in the form of Nestor, king of sandy Pylos, whom all of the elder Greeks Agamemnon most honored. "Why are you asleep, Agamemnon?" Dream asked. "A leader in your position, in charge of the entire Greek army, should have too much on his mind to sleep the night away. Now listen carefully, for I bring you a message from Zeus, Lord of Olympus, who cares for you. Quickly rouse all the bronze-coated Greeks to arms, because now is the time to take Priam's great city. Hera has won the support of all the deathless gods, and by the will of Zeus, Troy is doomed. Do not forget these words once you awaken." So Dream spoke to Agamemnon and departed. Once wide awake, Agamemnon foolishly believed his dream to reflect reality. He put on his tunic, cloak, and sandals, and hung his sword around his shoulders. He took his father's scepter, fashioned by Hephaestus, in his hand, and had his heralds call the Greeks to assembly. When Agamemnon had explained to the council of elders the nature of his dream, wise Nestor spoke. "Friends, kings, and leaders of the Greeks," he began, "if any other Greek had had such a dream, we might think it false and therefore ignore it. However, since Agamemnon, who states that he is by far the greatest of the Greeks, has heard these words, let us prepare to attack." Meanwhile, Zeus sent Iris, his wind-footed messenger, to the place where the Trojan forces had assembled. There she appeared in the form of the Trojans' principal watchman. "Old sir," Iris said to Priam, "I have been a part of many battles, but I have never seen such a large and impressive army marching across the plain to attack us. In numbers they are as great as the leaves in the woods or the sands along the salt sea." Then Iris turned to Hector of the shining helm. "Hector, godlike son of Priam, I place you in command of all the Trojans and our allies. Because those who have come to our aid speak many different languages, let each chieftain inform and lead his own countrymen out to battle." So Iris spoke, and Hector knew her true voice and obeyed her advice. The horse-taming Trojans marched upon the field as noisily as cranes fly up into the sky toward the ocean when they flee from the heavy rains of winter. The bronze-coated Greeks silently approached them, each man with courage in his heart and eager for battle. Just as the south wind spreads a mist over mountain peaks, a mist that the shepherd despises but the robber loves, for it hides the land and a man can see no farther than he can throw a stone, so the feet of these hundreds upon hundreds of marching men created a heavy cloud of dust over the armies as they moved quickly across the plain. As the Greeks approached the Trojans, Paris became the Trojan champion. Carrying a bronze-tipped spear in each hand and upon his shoulders a panther skin, his curved bow, and his sword, he challenged the Greeks. "Come forth, any of you who think you are the best of the Greeks," he announced. "I challenge you to fight me face to face to the death." Menelaus was pleased in his heart to see Paris emerge from the Trojan throng, just as a hungry lion is delighted to come upon the carcass of a great horned stag or a wild goat, and he eats the tasty flesh even though he senses that young hunters with their pack of dogs are swiftly coming upon him. So Menelaus was delighted to see Paris, for the war-loving king of Sparta was anxious to take vengeance upon the Trojan prince who had taken fair Helen from her home and had carried her across the sea to Troy. But when Paris saw Menelaus leap from his chariot in order to accept his challenge, Paris suddenly became terrified. As a man turns pale, trembles, and reels backward when he spies a snake on his mountain path, so did Paris shrink fearfully away from war-loving Menelaus and hide among the Trojan ranks. When Hector observed this behavior, he criticized his brother with strong words. "Evil Paris, you are so handsome that women cannot resist you. It would have been far better for the Trojan people had you never been born, or had you died unwed. As it is, your behavior is shameful. Your countrymen scorn you, and Greeks must be laughing indeed to see that the Trojan champion, for all his beauty, lacks courage and strength in his heart." Hector then asked, "Are you the same man who crossed the salt sea to a strange land and returned with a beautiful woman, bringing sorrow upon your father, your city, and your countrymen, and shame upon yourself? Do you really intend to invade Menelaus? You should learn what kind of man he is whose wife you took. You will find no help in your lyre or in the gifts Aphrodite has bestowed upon you, for Menelaus is a respected warrior who would send you, defeated, into the dust. The Trojan people must share your cowardice, or they would have stoned you to death long before this for all the evils you have brought upon them." To these words Paris replied, "Hector, you are right to criticize me, but do not blame me for golden Aphrodite's gifts. Instead, command all the Greeks and Trojans to stand aside while I fight Menelaus hand to hand for fair Helen and all her treasure. Then our people and their allies can return to their homes, and the Greeks can return to their lands in peace." All the Greeks and Trojans were overjoyed to hear Hector's announcement, for the war rightfully was a conflict between Paris and Menelaus, and few were enthusiastic about continuing the fighting into this 10th year. The leaders of both forces united in prayer to Zeus and the other immortal gods, swearing to the terms of the agreement. Wide-ruling Agamemnon raised his arms and prayed, "Father Zeus, observe our oaths. If Paris kills Menelaus, fair Helen and all her possessions will be his, and we will return to Greece empty-handed. But if fair-haired Menelaus kills Paris, then the Trojans must return Helen and her treasure, along with suitable compensation for inciting us to war. Otherwise, I will remain on Trojan soil and continue to fight until I win what is rightfully mine." When Paris and Menelaus had armed themselves, they entered the clearing between the seated Trojan and Greek forces, approaching each other with glaring looks and ready spears. Paris was the first to throw his far-shadowing spear, which bent its bronze point upon meeting Menelaus's round shield. As Menelaus raised his spear, he prayed, "Zeus, Lord of Olympus, permit me to punish Paris for stealing my wife, so that any guest hereafter will fear to commit an offense against his friendly host." His spear penetrated Paris's armor, but it did not draw blood, and when he smashed his sword upon Paris's helmet, the sword fell to the ground, broken into 4 pieces. So war-loving Menelaus jumped upon Paris, grabbed the thick horsehair crest of his helmet, pulled him around, and began to drag his body backward toward the seated Greeks. Paris would have strangled to death, bringing Menelaus endless glory, if Aphrodite had not observed Paris's plight and cut his helmet strap, permitting him to break loose from Menelaus's grasp. When Menelaus leapt after Paris with his bronze spear, he could not find him, for Aphrodite had lifted him up, hidden him in a dense mist, and returned him to his bedroom in Priam's great city. Agamemnon shouted, "Hear me, all you Trojans and your allies. Obviously Menelaus has won the duel, so return Helen and her treasure to her rightful husband, and compensate the Greeks for Paris's offense." So he spoke, and all the Greeks shouted in agreement. However, Hera and Athena were still angry with Paris for choosing Aphrodite's beauty over their own. This meant that Zeus could keep his word to Thetis without offending them, and the immortals agreed that Athena should cause the battle to resume. Athena chose the Trojan Pandarus and approached to him in the form of a respected Trojan spearman. "Why don't you shoot Menelaus with one of your arrows?" she suggested. "Then you will win fame and honor in the eyes of all the Trojans, especially Paris. He surely will reward you most handsomely for killing Atreus's war-loving son." So bright-eyed Athena persuaded the foolish Pandarus to draw his bow upon the unsuspecting Menelaus. However, because Athena at heart was a friend to the king of Sparta, she directed Pandarus's arrow through Menelaus's belt, where it wounded but did not kill him. Agamemnon was so outraged at the injury to his brother that no one could accuse him of reluctance or cowardice as the Trojans resumed the battle. Leaving his chariot, he went by foot through the ranks of the bronze-coated Greeks, eagerly cheering them on to battle and the winning of glory. "Father Zeus will not help those who do not keep their word," he cried, "so be of good strength and courage. Vultures will feed on Trojan flesh, and many Trojan wives and children will sail home with us once we have taken Priam's well-defended city." Just as the waves of the salt sea pound the shore, one after another driven forward by the west wind, so did the Greeks return to the battle, group after group, in endless succession, and each chieftain commanded his respectful, silent men, gleaming in their armor. The Trojans, on the other hand, were as noisy as herds of sheep impatiently waiting to be milked, for they included peoples from many lands who did not share a common language. Bronze clashed upon bronze until untold numbers of Greeks and Trojans remained upon the plain, intermingled with their faces buried in the dust.